payoff for investors in the Canadian oil sands isn't $147 a barrel, because remember, $147 a barrel is pretty bearish for the rest of the world. The huge payoff is when the rest of the world wants to own the Canadian oil sands, and at $147 a barrel, they're going to pay a huge multiple.
So you can't hedge. So one doesn't act reasonably and rationally and hedge a reasonable and rational majority of that, and a hedge that is put into place can't ever be lifted? Is that what I'm to take away from this conversation?
I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that when you hedge, understand that one of the things that you are doing is you're hedging your takeover value.
Yeah, but you're
now,
also...
I know that at $38, Murray's not interested in takeover. But at $147, a lot of folk in this place would be interested. And at $147, that's not what you want to have hedges. If, Dennis, you're saying tactically in the next 3-4 months when oil prices are going down because we're in a global recession, should we hedge? Yeah. I mean, that's almost a rhetorical question. But let me just point out that going future, and I don't mean 10 years from now, I mean 18 months from now, don't forget, a hedge is going to hurt your takeover value.
I've been a hedger all my life, and I've had to teach courses on it, and how do you do it, and it dawned on me one time after a period of time that hedging is obviously a sum-zero game. What one guy wins, another guy loses, and I was trying to discern for myself once, why does a hedger hedge? Why do you do it? What's the benefit of it? And it dawned on me one evening that a hedger hedges because when everybody else is puking, you're the only guy who's still there and can buy everybody else when they're giving up, when the banks look around and say, can you take this group over? Because you're the only one who's there who still has cash. Things always get their worst at the bottom. We know that. And the hedger is always there. He has that ability to remain. He gets to be the taker-over-er, not the take-e. And I guess unless I misunderstand the essence of this business, is that owning the other guy and taking over the other guy is a better thing than, more often than not, being the taker-over-er. So maybe I got it wrong, but I'd rather be in business, viable and consistent, than betting on the come. If I'm going to go do that, let's go bet on the black in Las Vegas, and I prefer not doing that.
Well, enough of this hedging stuff. A host of politicians, regulators, and now 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago have blamed the run-up in crude prices to $147 last year on financial speculators, especially large institutional investors who now view commodities as a separate asset class. Do you believe it was financial speculators that drove the market to its high, or was the move justified by underlying supply and demand fundamentals? Jeff?
Well, I don't think it's an either-or, okay, because you have to ask yourself what brought the speculators into the game in the first place. And I think what brought the speculators into the game in the first place was all of a sudden the basic laws of demand and supply were no longer working. The law of supply said higher prices should bring more oil, yet we didn't see oil supply grow at all from 2005 to 2008. And the law of demand says that higher prices should reduce demand, but perversely, world demand was growing twice as rapidly over the last 4 to 5 years than it was when oil prices were 1/7 of that. So that meant it seemed to be a free ride, and the speculators poured in. And as I said, what they lost sight of is the fact that oil can be its own worst enemy. But if we're going to look at fundamental markets that are tighter, and I think we're going to be as short as 2 million barrels a day by 2010, compared to maybe 1.5 million barrels a day in 2007. If we're going to see those same conditions reappear, then we're going to attract all the speculative capital that we saw in 2007 and 2008. And I would argue that, even in the absence of speculators, even if oil just stayed at $90 to $100 and never went up to $147, the challenges of the world economy are essentially the same. Because unfortunately, and I guess this will beg another question, but unfortunately for all the efficiency gains that we have, for the fact that it now takes 50% less oil to produce a unit of GDP than it did in the 1970s, the U.S. economy And every other major industrialized economy is just as dependent, if not more dependent, on oil today than it was 30 years ago.
I'll take let's see. My fellow speculators in the world will take me to task for this, but I'm fortunate enough to sit on the committee at NC State University, where we have the money that has been given to us to keep the university going. And, we don't have much, $1.2 billion, so we're just a little state university. But it was astonishing to me how many groups came to us in the previous 3 years explaining to us on the Endowment Policy Committee how important it was that we have exposure to this new asset class called commodities. Thank God I was on that committee, because I'm sorry, this ain't no asset class. Stocks are an asset class. Bonds are an asset class. Commercial property may well be an asset class. But commodities are simply commodities. And we were, the groups that had gone to the NC States, to the Carolinas, to Duke, to Yale, to Harvard, and had sold this notion that commodities were an asset class, succeeded beyond their wildest imagination that a bunch of yahoos bought into it. And they bought long the commodity market. They owned it in size. They had no idea what they were buying. They had no idea what backwardation or contango was in a futures contract. They had no idea other than, we got to get us some commodities because that's what we've been taught for the last 3 years. So by God, after 3 years of having it been sold to them, beginning in basically the fourth quarter of 2007, and honestly in the first quarter of 2008 when we had committee meetings, and then in May and June of last year, everybody bought into it. I mean, the amount of money rushing in on the long side of it didn't matter. It wasn't natural gas. It wasn't crude oil. It was bloody spring wheat. It was cotton. It was hard red winter wheat. It was livestock. They bought everything on the long side only. And lo and behold, July 4 last year, whatever it was, the switch changed. Something happened on July 4. Wheat cracked, corn cracked, crude oil cracked, nat gas cracked, livestock cracked, cotton cracked, and everything went down. And now these same people who bought the long-only side of this asset class are now holding the same committee meetings and saying, good God, what did we do? And they can't believe how much money they have lost. Now, it took 3 years to buy into the notion of owning this asset class called commodities. It's taken them about 6 months to realize that hurt. That really didn't feel all that good. And now the committees are meeting and saying, perhaps we are going to mitigate some of the ownership of these things. Some are saying, and I like to say that it's Mark Twain's cat. Mark Twain's cat, as Mark Twain said, a cat that sits upon a hot stove shall never sit upon a hot stove again, nor upon a cold one either, because they all look hot to him. Sat upon that hot stove, and they're not going to sit on that stove again. So now you've got probably a year and a half of liquidation on the part of the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons. And oh, isn't it interesting that Harvard, I love to take Harvard to task. I just went to North Carolina State, just a little state school. We avoided all this problem. We lost 8% last year. Harvard, ain't it nice, was down 48% in their endowment fund. I just think that's lovely. A goodly portion of that was the fact